Hello, Tony Vera. The mainline media has this narrative that sucks. George Floyd protests throughout the USA. The people in the Bronx won a big class action lawsuit against the New York City police. They were wrong, man. But the mainline media will make you think that all protesters were violent. There were a lot of peaceful protesters in the George Floyd protest. I know, I worked a few of them in LA. But this was amazing what the cops did to these protesters, but all the lies that are being told on television, making it seem like these people are Black Lives Matter, breaking windows, but these people were peaceful protesters. That's why the city agrees to pay them. Watch the video that I'm going to show, and the original video will be in the description, but when you look at the news, they have one narrative on putting all the protesters into one group. There were peaceful protesters, there were violent protesters, but the ones that are getting the settlement, it's proven that they were peaceful and were attacked by the New York City Police Department. They were totally wrong. And I'm pro-cop. I'm pro-good cop, bad. I don't like bad cops, but I'm pro-cop. We need cops, but they were wrong on this one. Please watch the documentary, people. And you'll see for yourself. The full video will be in the description. So the mainline media, you got it wrong on this one.
The city has agreed to pay millions of dollars to protesters who were aggressively boxed in by police officers during the George Floyd demonstrations back in 2020.
CBS 2's Ali Bauman spoke to protesters involved in this historic lawsuit.
They started hitting people with batons. They started ramming people with the bikes. They started spraying tear gas. There were cops on top of cars that were punching demonstrators. It was terror.
Samira and Amali Sierra were among the hundreds of people peacefully protesting in the Bronx on June 4th, 2020, after the murder of George Floyd. Just after the city's then 8 p.m. curfew, the Sierra sisters say NYPD officers began boxing the crowd in.
They just kept moving in from both ends of the street, and they were crushing our bodies together.
It's a tactic known as kettling.
Many people were at that point, like pleading for their lives. I can't breathe, right? Open it up. We're not fighting back.
Then came the mass arrests.
I was body slammed by about 6 officers.
And while exercising that right to not be brutalized and killed by the police, you yourself are brutalized.
Lance Clark and Joshua Moskovitz filed a class action lawsuit on the protesters' behalf. Now, almost 3 years later, New York City has agreed to pay more than $21,000 to each person who was there. If all the protesters participate, the city could end up paying upwards of $7 million. The lawyers say this is the largest ever settlement in a mass arrest lawsuit.
We think that reflects an acknowledgement that what happened here was a human rights violation.
A spokesman for the NYPD told us much of its policies and training for policing large-scale demonstrations have been re-envisioned since, and the NYPD remains committed to continually improving its practices. For the Sierra sisters, it's no coincidence police used kettling in the Bronx, even though most of the 2020 protests were in Manhattan.
Black and brown folks, we are the Bronx. And it's very clear that the city of New York just wanted to silence us.
Hopefully, what happened here today shows them that there are consequences, and the people that live in this neighborhood deserve the same respect and treatment as people that live in other parts of New York City.
If a judge approves the settlement, payments could be made as early as this year. In the Mott Haven section of the Bronx, Ali Bauman.
On the evening of June 4th, around 300 protesters gather at what's known as the Hub, the intersection of 149th Street and 3rd Avenue in Mott Haven, a predominantly black and brown neighborhood in the South Bronx, for one of many marches happening around the city that day. It was a peaceful protest, but this march would end with a violent police crackdown and mass arrest. Human Rights Watch has interviewed and reviewed testimony from dozens of witnesses and analyzed over 150 videos taken by protesters and bystanders. We found that the New York Police Department used the 8 p.m. curfew to justify a plan to trap, assault, and arrest the protesters. The march was organized by a number of local activist groups. Mott Haven has some of New York City's highest rates of poverty and homelessness, and is one of its most heavily policed neighborhoods. Its residents have suffered the consequences of systemic racism for decades.
Fuck the police!
It was an FTP rally, and FTP can mean a lot of different things. Free the people, feed the people. Most people know it to mean F the police.
Fuck the police!
There was a lot of energy, a lot of anger, but honestly, a lot of optimism.
The march twisted and turned through Mott Haven, at one point reaching the Patterson houses, home to thousands of residents who were especially hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic.
People were very, very excited as we were passing, and you could just feel the energy from people who were hearing us from their windows.
As the marchers headed down Willis Avenue, more than 50 police officers blocked the street.
Yo, we gonna go around. We want to go around.
The march redirected down 136th Street, and in the final minutes just before the 8 o'clock curfew, instead of allowing or even directing the marchers to disperse, the NYPD diverted its bicycle officers to block the marchers just as they reached the intersection of 136th and Brook Avenue.
Mama, face that one! Move the crowd! Move back! Move back! Go that way! Go that way!
And from behind the march, a line of officers blocked the protesters from turning back. It's a tactic called kettling.
Yo, you're corralling us! Where the fuck are we gonna go? Where do we go? Where do we fucking go? You're corralling us! Where do we go?
Police have us fucking surrounded right now. Police got us trapped. They fucking out here right now on the bullhorn telling us that we can't be here after 8. I got your phone, babe. And we ain't do nothing wrong. At about 7:45, they intentionally started cornering us. They have us pushed in a pin. We are trapped. We are trapped right now. Whatever narrative is spun to you later, do not believe it. They have helicopters overhead. Before 8 o'clock, they was already out here trapping us.
Beginning at 8 p.m., the citywide curfew will be effective.
With most of the protesters trapped on 136th Street, one of the march's organizers, Shannon Jones, had gotten cut off from the crowd.
No justice, no peace!
She becomes the focus of Chief Terrence Monahan, the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the NYPD.
Yo! I'm not fucking with y'all. Get the fuck back! Get the fuck back!
Meanwhile, soon after the 8 o'clock curfew arrives, the police moved in on the crowd trapped in the kettle. On the north side of the block, without provocation, an NYPD legal department official directs officers to arrest the legal observers, who were clearly identified and had permission to be out after curfew.
And a young lady that was in the middle of the kettle tried to show documentation to the police officers that, you know, we were essential workers and we were allowed to be out past the curfew.
Sir, What's your name? Oh!
They body slammed the young lady to the ground and arrested her. Around the same time is when they started rounding up all of the medical workers.
Other than essential workers.
So once the medical professionals and legal observers were out the way, the police really just started cracking down on the protesters with impunity.
We are peaceful, what the fuck are you? We are peaceful, what the fuck are you? We are peaceful.
The protesters had already been forced to break the curfew, and the police keep ratcheting up the pressure.
You guys are on the other fucking side! You guys are on the other side! Where do we go?
How do we go? Where are we gonna go? We're corralled. Jail.
We are currently trapped at 136 and Brook Avenue since 7:45. They are pushing us. 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 Stay tight. Stay tight. Stay tight.
Move, 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 move.
What are they doing? Why are they doing this? The police officers are like grabbing people. Oh my goodness.
You guys are pushing us from the other side. Bro, what the fuck? Bro, why don't you just help us? We're getting blocked the fuck out. Get us the fuck out.
It's okay. It's okay, Taylor. It's all right, 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 Taylor.
What I observed and what I witnessed was just a complete depression of the protesters' rights to peacefully assemble and the protesters' First Amendment rights. It was a moment where, you know, the American Constitution was just thrown out the window, and, you know, we had what seemed like vigilante justice by the police officers in the moment. It was a very tragic thing to witness.
Over the next few hours, police arrested over 250 people. Instead of being given summonses and released, those arrested are brought to jails all over the city and held for hours, overnight and into the next day, with no food and little or no water. Many are injured and get no medical help. The next day, Mayor Bill de Blasio and Police Commissioner Dermot Shea attempt to justify the crackdown.
In terms of what happened in Mott Haven, this is something that the NYPD saw coming, an organization that literally was encouraging violence. And
they respond to questions with an admission that the crackdown was pre-planned.
And we had a plan which was executed nearly flawlessly in the Bronx. This wasn't, again, about protest. This was about tearing down society.
The NYPD told Human Rights Watch that the intent of this assembly was to engage in violence and inflict harm. But Human Rights Watch found no evidence of protesters using violence. The police's actions in Mott Haven could come with a heavy price. Human Rights Watch estimates that the crackdown may cost New York City taxpayers several $1 million. In addition to the cost of the large-scale police presence, around 100 protesters, observers, and medical workers have filed notice of their intent to sue the city. Instead of cracking down on peaceful protesters and stifling their calls for change, local governments should finally do what it takes to end the structural racism and systemic police abuse that people in Mott Haven and communities like it have experienced for far too long.